In 1977, Don Merton stood in the dark on the southern tip of Stewart Island and heard something nobody expected to hear again. A boom, low frequency, rolling through the bottom of the valley. Then another, from a ridge half a kilometer away. The Kakapos were still alive. Merton had led 4 two-man teams into the bush. They found 23 Boland track systems freshly carved into the hillside acoustic chambers dug by male Kakapos for one purpose, calling for a mate. Every bird they identified was male, not one female, not one nest, not one egg. The boom traveled 5 kilometers through still air. In 1977, on Stewart Island, nothing answered back. 49 years later, in 2026, 95 Kakapo chicks hatched across 4 remote islands off the coast of New Zealand, the highest number in 31 years, a new record by a wide margin. I'm Tom Marsh, and what happened between that unanswered call and that number is not a story about miracles. It is the story of a program that nearly failed not once, but 3 times. A man who refused to stop looking, and a discovery that did not come from a laboratory, it came from a tree. Before we get deeper into that, there is something I want to mention. This story, the rimu connection, the sex ratio crisis, the semen drone, the 3D printed eggs is the kind of case that I could spend 3 hours on and still leave things out. The full picture of how these recoveries actually work, species by species, decision by decision, is what I put together in the Rewilding Complete Pack. You will find the link in the description, or you can scan the code on your screen right now. I want to come back to one detail in this story that almost nobody talks about, and it changes how you understand everything that came after. But first, the bird itself. The kakapo is a parrot, not metaphorically large, genuinely the heaviest parrot on the planet. A big male weighs 4 kilograms. It cannot fly. The keelbone, the anchor for flight muscles, in every other bird, has largely disappeared in the kakapo. In its place, legs dense enough to carry a body that evolution never expected to leave the ground. It navigates in darkness using a scent that people describe as honey mixed with the inside of an old violin case. Sweet, distinct. You can smell a kakapo before you see it. It can live between 90 and 100 years. A bird alive today may have hatched before your grandparents were born. It has the lowest metabolic rate of any parrot on Earth, capable of surviving for days on almost nothing. And it is the only parrot in the world with a lek mating system. Males excavate bowl-shaped depressions into hillsides, natural and acoustic chambers, and boom from them night after night for months at a time. The call carries 5 kilometers in still air. Females walk to the males they choose. Females do not breed until they are 9 to 11 years old. They breed again only every 2 to 6 years. If a 5-year-old female is lost today, the program has permanently lost a minimum of 5 years of reproductive capacity. There is no way to compress that time. The biology does not negotiate. When threatened, the kakapo freezes. It trusts its mottled green plumage to blend with the moss. Against hawks attacking from above, this works. Against a predator that hunts by smell, it is the worst possible response. For tens of millions of years, it was enough. The kakapo lineage adapted in a world with no ground predators. The only threats in New Zealand came from the air. So the bird became heavy, fragrant, flightless, and still, every trait that made it extraordinary in that world made it catastrophically vulnerable in the next one. 800 years ago, Polynesian navigators arrived in New Zealand. They called the bird kakapo kaka, meaning parrot, po, meaning night. For Ngai Tahu, the largest iwi of the South Island, the kakapo was taonga, a treasure woven into the history and into the names of the land itself. The main sanctuary island in the recovery program is called Wanuahu, in Te Reo Maori, new land. Those first arrivals came with dogs and Pacific rats. The kakapo did not know how to run. European colonization in the 19th century added 4 more introduced predator species. The bird was not fragile. It was placed into a world it had never evolved to survive, and by the time anyone understood the scale of the problem, the population had collapsed so thoroughly that between 1949 and 1973, more than 60 expeditions found 6 kakapos. 5 of those died within months. The first serious recovery attempt had come almost a century before Merton. Richard Henry was a New Zealand naturalist, born in 1845. Not a government scientist. A man who had spent years in the Fiordland wilderness watching kakapos disappear and writing letters to officials who had not yet grasped what was happening. In 1894, the government approved his proposal. He began moving kakapos by hand in a rowboat to Resolution Island off the Fiordland coast. Nearly 400 birds, transported one at a time. The first organized island sanctuary for a wildlife species anywhere in the world. He began moving the birds before anyone had agreed on a plan. He understood that waiting was the same as losing. In 1900, Stoats crossed the strait Henry believed was too wide. Within a few breeding seasons, all 400 birds were gone. He had done everything right. The ocean was simply not wide enough. A century later, when the 1995 program chose its islands, the lesson from Henry was the foundation. The islands selected this time were far beyond any strait he had used remote enough, with currents strong enough that Stoats have not crossed to them since. But moving the birds was only the beginning. What happened next? Nobody had predicted. By 1995, after 15 more years of effort, only 3 chicks had survived to adulthood. The total population stood at 51 birds, 31 males, 20 females. Those 20 reproductively capable females represented the entire reproductive future of the species. Every surviving kakapo was helicoptered to predator-free islands. All equipment sterilized before contact. The water barriers this time were far wider than anything Richard Henry had used. The birds were safe. They were fed. No disease, no predators, and year after year, almost nothing. By 2005, every kakapo carried a transmitter sending real-time data around the clock. Rangers knew exactly which birds were calling, which were moving, which were still. The program became the most monitored wild animal population on the planet, and this made the mystery worse, not better. Everything was known except the one thing that mattered. What was the trigger? The answer, when it finally arrived, was a single species of tree, and almost nobody had thought to look at it closely. The rimu is a native New Zealand conifer that can live 500 years. It fruits heavily, only every 2 to 6 years, what botanists call a mast year. Conservationists had observed from early on that kakapos bred during rimu mast years. The correlation was clear. The explanation was not. In 2015, Dr. Pamela von Hersch and her team at Massey University published a chemical analysis of rimu fruit in the Journal of Steroid Biochemistry and Molecular Biology. The fruit contained unusually high concentrations of calcium, remarkable on its own, but the finding that changed the program was the vitamin D3. Scientists had long believed it was essentially impossible to find significant amounts of vitamin D3 in plant tissue. The kakapo is nocturnal, living under dense forest canopy, almost never in direct sunlight. It cannot synthesize vitamin D3 the way most animals do. Over tens of millions of years, it had found another route, the rimu. The fruit was not just food, it was a precise natural supplement, calcium and vitamin D3, delivered by the forest on a schedule that the bird's own body had been calibrated to wait for. And the mechanism was more specific still. The green, unripe rimu fruit, early in the fruiting season, triggers hormonal changes in the female that initiate breeding behavior. The ripe fruit, arriving weeks later, delivers the vitamin D3 and calcium her eggs and growing chicks require. The tree was not feeding the kakapo. The tree was timing the kakapo. For the bird to breed, 3 conditions had to align simultaneously. The rimu had to be fruiting. The unripe fruit had to be available to trigger the behavioral signal. The ripe fruit had to arrive in time to supply what the eggs needed. Remove any one of those conditions, and there was no breeding. Not as a preference, the birds could be persuaded to change. As a physiological limit inscribed in the chemistry of reproduction itself. Once the program understood the switch, they could build around it. But solving one problem uncovered three more, each stranger than the last. In 2002, rimu trees on Codfish Island produced one of the best mast seasons on record. The team pressed the advantage supplementary feeding for breeding females, giving them the best possible conditions going into nesting season. More than 40 chicks were born. Then came the sex ratio checks. 70% were male. The biology had a reason. Male kakapos are 30 to 40% larger than females and more energetically costly to produce. When a female detects extreme abundance, her body adjusts to produce the more expensive offspring. For 20 breeding females, that adjustment was nearly fatal to the program's future. The solution was to reduce their food, not below the threshold for breeding, but just below the level that triggered the male bias. The sex ratio returned to near 50-50. The population grew 40% that season. The second crisis was quieter, but longer. Every kakapo alive today descends from fewer than 30 distinct genetic lineages. The risk was accumulating, slowly weakening immunity, increasing the probability of birth defects. The solution was artificial insemination, semen from genetically underrepresented males matched to compatible females by algorithm. To incentivize collection from reluctant males, the team tried various approaches including remote-controlled vehicles modified to resemble female kakapos. Results were limited. The team moved on. What worked was speed. Kakapo semen loses viability within hours. A drone, named the spermacopter by the field team, transports fresh semen through the canopy in 5 to 8 minutes. Fertilization rates rose from 29% to 70%. Then, in 2019, the program's best season to that point was interrupted by aspergillosis, a fungal lung infection spreading through Winuahu. 21 birds infected, 9 died, including females, mid-incubation, and chicks in the nest. When eggs had to be moved to incubators, females needed replacement eggs to prevent nest abandonment. The replacement eggs were 3D printed. The studio that made them was Weta Workshop, the special effects company behind The Lord of the Rings. The females incubated them without apparent hesitation. When the outbreak was contained, the population count stood at 51, exactly the size of the entire species in 1995. And here is where this story stops, being about one program and becomes about something harder to name. Over 31 years, the program has consumed tens of millions of New Zealand dollars, up to 10 times more in active breeding seasons than in quiet ones. Decades of funding, often with no visible progress. A drone carrying semen over a forest canopy. Remote-controlled vehicles impersonating female parrots. Genetic matching by algorithm. Eggs manufactured by a film studio. At what point does a species recovery stop being a recovery and become the permanent maintenance of something that cannot survive without us? The first answer is irreversibility. The kakapo's dependency on the rimu, the hormonal cascade triggered by unripe fruit, the precision timing of vitamin D3 delivery for egg formation, took tens of millions of years to develop. Once it is gone, it cannot be rebuilt. The second is ecological. Fossilized kakapo dung contains pollen of the wood rose, Dactylanthus taylorii, in concentrations suggesting the bird was a primary seed disperser. When it disappears, the forest changes in ways that persist for centuries. The third is cultural. The kakapo is taonga for Ngaitahu. Its recovery is not a government wildlife program for those communities. It is the restoration of something that was taken. New Zealand is the only country that has sustained a program of this scale across 9 consecutive governments without canceling it. That institutional patience is rarer than the kakapo itself. In 2026, rimu trees across the southern islands produced a flowering season, unprecedented in recent memory. The kakapos did exactly what they had been built to do across tens of millions of years. 80 nests, more than 250 eggs, 95 chicks, shattering the 2019 record of 73. Every Friday during the breeding season, rangers updated the running count with a marker pen on the refrigerator door at camp. The number climbed every week. By the end, the people who had spent their careers watching this program could barely process what they were seeing. In 1995, 20 reproductively capable females. Today, 83. Total population, 236, the highest in 50 years. The Department of Conservation's target is 150 breeding females. The gap is the smallest it has ever been. And the current goal of the program is not more intervention. It is deliberate withdrawal. Fewer transmitters, fewer incubators, fewer human hands, until the kakapo can be a kakapo again without anyone watching. Don Merton spent the rest of his career building the program that would answer the questions Stewart Island had left open. In 1980, a Springer Spaniel on the island caught a scent and led its handler to a bird that was smaller, slimmer, greener than the males. Merton examined the plumage and said the search was over. The first female kakapo seen in nearly a century. 4 more were found nearby, with nests and chicks. He died in 2011. The population was around 120. He never saw 95. He never saw a ranger write that number on a refrigerator door on a Friday afternoon, or watched the total cross 200, or saw the program begin planning its own retreat. But every chick that hatched in 2026 traces its lineage through the females he found. Every island they live on was chosen using the principles he fought for. Every boom rolling through those valleys at night is the answer to the silence he heard on Stewart Island in 1977. The kakapo spent 700 years learning to disappear. It took one man who would not stop listening and one tree to remind it how to come back. There is a word for that in Te Reo Maori, Kaitia Kitanga, guardianship, the responsibility to protect what was entrusted to you. It does not translate cleanly into English, but the number 236, written in marker on a refrigerator door on a remote island, comes close. I want to know what you think. A recovery that required drones, genetic algorithms, 3D, printed eggs, and the nose of a Springer Spaniel, does that still count as saving something wild? Leave your answer below. If this story reached you the way I hoped it would, share it with someone who needs to hear that the news is not always what it looks like. There are more stories like this one than you would imagine, and I have many more to tell you. Soy Tom Marsh. Thank you for watching.